And here we are again.
Hello,
Sheila, I'll
everybody.
let you introduce us.
Okay, well, here's Jivan and Sheila. I've called myself Amadai in my website. It's my spiritual name, and we'll give you the website addresses when we're done. So Jivan and I have been talking about 25th of January 2025, and I first saw this date advertised on the internet in terms of a lovely graphic design of lots of planets all lined up in a straight line, and somebody talking about January the 25th, 2025 as being a really important date. So, as an astrologer, I thought, hold on a minute, I didn't know anything about loads of planets being in one line. And I actually Googled it and discovered that it was a one in so many billion chance that that would ever happen. But what somebody has done is that they've realised that there is an alignment of planets, which we can explain in a minute, and they've interpreted that as all the planets being in a straight line. Whereas Jivan has kindly put a chart together for the 25th of January 25, and I think you based that in Washington, DC, didn't you, Jivan?
Yeah, so just based on information I already had.
Yeah, and what time did you put it at?
I put midday, oh, well, I think I did just a
Yeah,
moment. Yeah, I did
and
midday.
we've got to have some kind of starting point. So that's the chart. And interestingly enough, for anybody who understands a little bit about astrology, but I'll talk you through it. On the left hand side, it says AC, which means ascendant. And on the ascendant, there is the planet Uranus. That's that symbol that you can see there, which is like a sort of trident with an orb underneath it. It's the best way I can describe it. Now, it's interesting to me that Uranus ended up on the ascendant because we randomly put in midday in Washington, because there's Uranus, the planet of the weird and wonderful, the unusual, the far out there, the
The
eccentric. Any other
UFOs.
words have we got to describe it, Jivan?
Yeah, just
Um,
I think I love the revolutionary theme with the Uranus. That it's a revolutionary.
yeah,
Sudden
all of those
truths as well.
things.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So that, and we've also got Pluto there, and it's a big P with a line underneath it. That's on what we call the midheaven, which is another important part of the chart, and MC written over it. So whenever that happens, if we see Pluto moving across that part of somebody's chart, we know that something massively transformative is happening in their lives, and their lives are never going to be the same again. But it's not instantaneous, it's a very slow moving change. But there we have two planets symbolizing change in very different ways, both there in prominent parts of the chart. So straight away we start to think, oh, perhaps the 25th of January 25 is an important day. And then we've also got three planets very close together, and they are aligned in a straight line: Saturn, Venus, and Neptune. And they're all in the planet of, in the sign of Pisces. But they're not exactly conjunct. Conjunct meaning absolutely together. Saturn and Venus are very close, conjunct, 16 and 21 degrees. And Venus and Neptune are very close, 21 and 27. So that's quite an alignment. But it isn't all the planets straight in a line, it's just those three. So whoever did the graphic design of what's going to happen on the 25th of January didn't really understand the technical side of what these planets are doing. They got a bit carried away with their imaginations and did a lovely picture of all the planets in the heavens conveniently going in a straight line. If
Yeah.
only that was the case, but doesn't happen. Even at the birth of Christ, which I looked up, I think there was only two or three planets in a line.
Yeah, that was
Yeah,
Jupiter and
but
Saturn, and I think Mars. I think was the third one.
quite possibly, yeah. And you can look that up. Anybody can look that up. So But what's interesting is that if you look at Saturn, Venus, and Neptune, and Mars, because Mars is in Cancer, and it's what we call in trine to those three planets. They're all in water signs, Cancer and Pisces. So that's quite neat, that's quite nice. That's a trine. They're exactly 120 degrees away from each other. And then we've also got, where does Uranus fit in with this? Uranus is at 23 in Taurus, and it's sextile 60 degrees away from Neptune, Venus, and Saturn. Now, those alignments, that big trine and that sextile, for an astrologer, that's nice. They are aligned and they are in a very good position with each other. But when we say they're aligned, it doesn't mean to say they are in a straight line. It means they're aligned and they're in a position where we can recognise there's a pattern to where they're placed. So, I don't know, over to you in a way, Jivan, for a couple of minutes to say what you would interpret that as when you look at those
Well,
planets there.
it's so essentially what this chart is. It's kind of looking at what's going on in Washington at that moment in time. Although I'd say it's significant, you've got the Sun and Pluto conjunct the midheaven, which is to do with the future prospects of either a country or an event or a person, the mark they want to make on the world, that kind of stuff. I'm not drawn at all to the planets supposedly in a line. It's more the Sun Pluto conjunction, and by default you've got the Mercury conjunction there as well. So I'm more excited about those planets and the fact that they trine Uranus, which is on the ascendant, and the descendant ruling the body, or the very physical form, or the most obvious form of someone. So I think any events pertaining to America, and maybe India because it has this similar formation, Canada and Mexico, I think they're in global media at the moment. So I think that would more pertain to the Sun-Pluto conjunction with the Mercury trine Uranus. And in the 12th house, sorry, I should mention that that's more the unseen forces, the spiritual. It's also, is it the house of closed enemies traditionally, or is it open enemies?
Yeah, well, whenever I see Uranus in the 12th section, and if you look at Uranus, it's on the top side of the ascendant, so it means it's in the 12th section of the chart. You can see a little 12 there if you look. I always think about mediums and spiritual awakening and people being able to tap into some kind of clairvoyant link with something outside themselves. So I think what we've talked in the past about spirituality, God, the source, whatever you want to call it, and how that's an internal thing for most people. And that's true, but to me, when I look at this chart, I think, well, maybe it's the combination or the joining of the outside and the inside, because if Mercury in Capricorn there is the planet of communication, Mercury in Capricorn's quite serious, isn't it? It's quite heavy, it's quite factual, down to earth, all that sort of thing, and it's very close to the midheaven. So to me, that shows very public conversations about spirituality and what we don't really understand. You know, the stuff that some people can tap into quite easily and other people think is a load of rubbish. But to me, I would look at that and say, well, there you go. It's kind of there in your face. Let's talk about these matters now openly. We just have to discuss it. We don't have any choice. It's the
Yeah,
perfect time to talk about it. Because there's a trine, i.e. 120 degrees, between, it's Mercury and Uranus, isn't it? It seems
yeah,
like a perfect storm in terms of, well, now's the time. Let's just open up the discussion. about what's going on out there. And the other thing that I started to think about when I looked at this was what's going on at the moment in America, particularly because something bizarre is going on, let's put it that way. And Uranus is the planet of bizarre occurrences. You know, that everybody's looking up into the heavens, particularly in New Jersey, and I believe other states now in America, and they're seeing all these flashing lights and saying, oh, they look like drones, or what's going on here? And it makes us all wonder what this means, and why are the government not being open about what's going on. Was they're saying they don't actually know at the moment. And because of what we've had going on anyway, with Neptune and Pisces, which is the 3 planets you can see at the top there inside Pisces, for quite a while now, a few years, you and I, Jivan, have put a podcast together about Neptune and how confusing it's been and how nobody really knows what the truth is. And everybody gets quite strident and almost religious about it, you know. Oh, it's this, it's definitely Trump, or it's definitely the Democrats, or it's definitely mad people. But actually, nobody really knows. Everybody's very confused about what's actually happening. And I think that's kind of muddied the waters a bit. So now we've got the general public in America in particular staring up at the sky in kind of wonderment and fascination, and then you see little video clips of people running away because they're terrified. But in the main, the feeling I get about it is that people are absolutely fascinated. They're just, you know, compelled to look and think, what on earth is going on? This is definitely something significant. And so I'm just wondering, what's your take on that?
Well, I think having seen people's reactions to when there was one of the military generals of the American army saying, well, it's obviously Iran, because they singled out Iran because it's logically their major enemy right now, and they've made open threats to America. But everyone's reaction has just been, you know, just, well, you know, it's, you know, no one's really amazed that it could be Russia or Iran. Like, we're not all kind of, I think maybe 20 years ago, the government could have said anything and we would have believed it. But I think even the most kind of gullible person kind of started to wake up and think, well, do we trust this information? Is this the whole story? Is there something more? So I think it's harder to kind of pull the wool over everyone's eyes now. So the fact that, you know, there are an obvious threat and people are just kind of dull to it kind of speaks volumes, I think.
And also,
but I think
that I'm thinking about Saturn here, you know, and the fact that you've got Mercury in Capricorn. Let's go for the Mercury in Capricorn, which is linked with Saturn. I just sort of think this chart shows me that people want facts. They don't want to be, that is at the by the time we get to the 25th of January next year, 2025, people won't want to be listening to ideas. Well, we think it could be this, or we think it could be that. They've already done that for a month, more than a month, 6-7 weeks. The general feeling in the world will be, well, we just need to know now. We need to know the facts. And I think it's interesting also that Trump, his inauguration, I believe, is the 20th of January. And he's already been quite vocal about this phenomena up in the sky. And he's saying, well, we need to do something. I mean, why is nobody telling us? And he's very straight to it, isn't he? You know, that's what he's like. I'm not going to enter into what we think politically about Trump. That's his personality. You either like it or you don't. But anyway, there he is. More or less, you know, the majority of America has voted for him. He's going to be the president. And I think that it might be one of the first things that he decides to tackle We need to
Yeah.
have some straight talking, Mercury in Capricorn, about what's going on, about what these phenomena are. Of course, there are other theories about the fact that there's some secret agency that wants to freak out the people so that it can get control of them, and that actually there's a branch of the American establishment that has been spending loads and loads of money on these vehicles and these weird things forever. Of course, it could be there's a mixture of UFOs in there and American-made craft. I mean, we don't know. It could be any of
Yeah,
these things
absolutely.
because the presence of Uranus there. But what interests me is the fact, from our point of view, you and I, we already did a podcast last year where we did actually mention UFOs, and we said, oh, we wouldn't be surprised if there's going to be a load of stuff about UFOs in 2025. But we didn't realise when we said it how significant it was.
Yeah, I
We just
honestly
said,
didn't
whoa,
think you.
it was kind of an
Yeah.
add-on, really, wasn't it? We didn't really
Mm.
focus on it. So maybe that's why we're so fascinated now, because it does look very, very significant. The
There are
thing
the
that,
court hearings as well, aren't there, at the moment about what we know and what we don't know. And it's still not clear if UFOs are a threat or otherwise.
well, as somebody said, I don't know who it was, but they said, well, some of them might be and some of them might not. I mean, because apparently there are possibly lots of different types of aliens from lots of different places, and therefore we can't put them all in one group and say, oh, well, they're all good or they're all
Yeah.
frightening. We just don't know. But of course, Uranus is about being open minded as well. And it's like, well, just, be prepared to think about anything that is weird and unusual and a bit wacky. Just be open minded. And it's almost like we get forced into it, really.
Yeah.
And, like me, in my horoscope, I've got Uranus quite strong, opposite my midheaven. Of course, people used to joke with me years ago. They say, "You be the first up the ramp. You'd be going, welcome to our planet,"
Yeah, I
because
believe that about you,
I'm not.
actually.
I'm not terrified at the moment.
Mm.
I'm kind of thinking, oh, this could be really cool. Maybe, and if you have any kind of religious or spiritual background and you've done a bit of reading, there are theories about other beings, other beings that are close to the source of goodness, shall we say, who want the best for us and want to help us. Because I always joke about it and say, if I was an alien and I was in a spaceship looking down at Earth, I'd be thinking, what's it are they doing down there? Because they can't even get on with each other. How are they
Yeah,
going to be like
absolutely.
with us if they can't even get on with each other?
Yeah.
So, there's one school of thought that says, well, they're going to come down and save us. And sometimes I think, oh, please, just do it.
Yeah, I would just, yeah, like just end the misery. It's,
Well, the advent of the internet and phones has given us everybody in the world has given us immediate access to information. And
yeah,
so all of us are seeing this. It's not as if the word doesn't get out. We don't need the media, really. A lot of people don't watch the main news anymore because they make up their own minds about things. This is part of the big changes that we've been going through. So to me, it's if I look at the positive side of Uranus, I think, well, it's exciting. These are very different times, and maybe we're going to learn something new that is going to help us as a planet. Yeah.
yeah. And I think with people power, I think we're the ones that lead the way, the everyday average Joe. If you look at when Pluto first arrived in Capricorn, it was 2008, May 2008 to be exact, and it was the breakdown first of the banks. and then you had every major corporation, which has now come under the spotlight, every global corporate entity, and even now people's private financial hedge funds, which are actually organized entities like business entities. They're now in the spotlight as well because it
But
concerns
if
people.
you just think about the UK, the NHS, that everybody has
Hmm.
quoted as a bastion of goodness and wonderfulness. I mean, it's on its knees. Well, it's gone past its knees. It's lying
Yeah.
there, gasping for breath. The BBC, which from the beginning of television has been the bastion of
Hmm.
communication and sells a lot of their programs all over the world. I mean, they've lost their mojo, and
Yeah,
people are
and the
very, very,
credibility.
particularly in England, people are very, very cynical about the BBC. It's a fact, it's not an opinion. I mean, that's what's
Hmm.
happened. People have demonstrated outside the buildings and all sorts of things. The bastions are collapsing, and people are getting very cynical about politicians all over the world. Governments are collapsing and changing right, left, and
Hmm.
centre, and still we can't seem to get the balance right. So it's very Pluto in Capricorn, and of course we're coming to the end of that now, and it seems
And
as though till the very last moment, the buildings are going to be wobbly.
yeah, literally with the schools, the schools with the asbestos poisoning, the schools collapsing. It's just amazing what's happened. But again, people have led the charge by bringing it to light and saying this is not okay. Firstly, with the banks, I remember working for a bank myself, and it was easy to kind of sell bank products to people who called in. And the very next day, when people started to feel the pinch, it was more. People had become more cynical just then, saying things like, "Why should I believe you?" After everything that's happened to my money, or our collective wealth, all that kind of stuff. So now today we have everyone's got access to the internet. It's hard to pull the wool over anyone's eyes in terms of being able to say what's happening on the ground somewhere in the Middle East, somewhere in Far East Asia, because people will upload things to social media, videos, so the evidence is right there. So it's interesting that it's only now Pluto has come into Aquarius, so I feel like we haven't seen anything yet in terms
No,
of people power. So that's very encouraging, but also
and
open-mindedness.
I suppose because the planet Uranus links with Aquarius, is the planet of Aquarius.
Mm.
It's about group endeavours. It's about the power of the people, as you say. It's about people getting together and creating the world they want. But as you say, we haven't seen anything yet. This is just the seeds being sown.
Mm.
It really is, to my mind, the beginning of the age of Aquarius, and give it another sort of 8 years, 10 years. Oh my goodness, I think we're going to be gasping at the changes that have taken place. Of course, Elon Musk has just introduced all his robots. What do they call
Oh
them? I
yeah,
forget the name of them now, but I would love one. I'm just in my old age. I quite fancy having my own robot.
it does
Um,
sound nice. I mean, I don't
yeah.
know why they had to look so similar to the robots in iRobot, where one of them becomes self-aware. But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But I just love the idea of someone just making my tea when I've come home from work. Just
Yeah, but then the only thing is that the robot might start to say one day, I don't want you to have that for tea tonight. I want
yeah,
you to have the other thing.
yeah. You
I
can't
don't
override the
know.
program. And I think
So,
there's all this fear about robots and big corporations and big tech, but they've recently also come under the spotlight. I think they just don't publicize it. But I actually feel very positive about the future simply because, firstly, we're more aware and more untrusting of kind of what we're agreeing to. So I think, firstly, I think the Pluto in Aquarius is going to come across as a cultural revolution. I mean, you already have Hollywood and kind of major stars kind of on the spotlight now, and even what sounded like a fringe topic years ago, like a conspiracy theory, we're openly talking about it now. Like, the whole hashtag Thank Beyonce thing. Uh, Famous rappers and other actors who are now implicated. I mean, who was it? The one in Titanic. He's kind of actually fled America
Has
recently.
he? Leonardo.
Leonardo DiCaprio.
Has
Yeah,
he?
ponies fled. Yeah.
Well, there you
Um,
go. You see, it's what we thought. It's very Neptunian. What we thought isn't the case. All our heroes are not the heroes that we thought. That we can't tell the difference between heroes and villains. It's all very Neptunian still, Neptune and Pisces. I was going to go on to Neptune and Pisces actually because the other date that we decided to talk about was the 25th of March. So that's exactly 2 months after 25th of January. Do you have a chart for that as well?
I'll bring it up now.
Excuse me for my cough. Because I noticed something about Saturn and Neptune in that chart that I thought might be interesting to look at.
Okay, let's see.
So while you're putting that together, I'll just talk about the fact that this all started because I was a bit cross actually, because I thought, there we go, there's the internet at its worst. Somebody doing this lovely graphic representation of a load of planets all lined up in a straight line. And then I started to investigate, and then I got a bit intrigued. So I hope that's blown up the myth that these planets are all literally in a straight line in January next year, because they're
Yeah, they're
not.
definitely not in a straight line. I think it's an important date to consider, considering the inauguration is it on the
Yeah,
20th of
20th,
January.
as far as I know, yes. Um, but what interests me when you do get the other chart up is that Robert Hand, good old Robert Hand, I don't even know if he's still with us actually, but he wrote this wonderful book called Planets in Transit, which has been a real basic textbook for astrologers. And if you look at Saturn conjunct Neptune in that book, it gives a very good graphic description of if somebody's got that in their chart, it really messes with their confidence, and it's very depleting, and they start to feel not very well, and it just you just lose your self-esteem really. And it's been happening a little bit because Saturn and Neptune have both been in Pisces for quite a while, but they've moved by January, they'll have moved apart, so they're not really affecting each other so much. So in January, you've got Saturn at 16 degrees of Pisces and Neptune at 27, so that's too far away to really cause that terrible crisis of confidence feeling. But by March, by the 25th of March, let's just look at that chart that you've put up, trying to see it. Does it say 20? No, that's Uranus. Let's see where's Saturn. And there they are. They've moved much closer to each other. There they are in the 10th house. You can actually, there's a real lineup of planets then.
That's
You
what you
can't
call a
tell.
lineup, and even
Sorry?
still not a perfect lineup. That's what you call
No.
a lineup, but even then, not an absolute lineup like someone
Yeah.
did on
I
AI.
mean,
Anyway,
it would be more accurate to do a graphic picture of planets all in a line. So you've got the Sun, Mercury, is that Venus, Neptune, and Saturn, and is that the North Node as well? Ooh, the North Node's
yeah, the North
important.
Node conjunct
So that's quite
uh, Saturn.
significant, I think. Um,
I've included Chiron as well because I think it has very physical implications personally. I love
yes,
using it in astrology, but the square to Mars as well. And if does it square the ascendant? No, it
And
doesn't. I
are
think just
Mars,
barely.
what are Mars and Pluto doing on that chart? I can't quite see it from
Mars.
here.
Oh yeah, it's a bit small. Mars is in Cancer, 21 degrees 40 in Cancer.
Uh,
Um, I think
oh,
it
right,
just
and then, and
skipped the
where's
ascendant
Pluto? Oh,
conjunction.
well, there you go now.
Pluto,
Did you
the
say
Pluto,
21 degrees or 22?
21
21.
degrees 40 is closer to 22.
And Pluto's at 3 of Aquarius.
Pluto's at 3 degrees
All right.
Aquarius.
So
Yeah.
Pluto and Mars have moved away from each other. Phew, thank goodness for that, because I don't like it when Pluto
Hmm.
and Mars are opposite each other. That's all a bit violent and warlike and terrifying.
Yeah.
So we can breathe a sigh of relief. But what have we got? So we've got, as far as I can tell, we've got the Sun, Mercury, Venus, and the North Node. Well, let's count the first three: the Sun, Mercury, and Venus, all at the beginning of Aries. And the North Node has moved back slightly into Pisces, but it's still moving towards the beginning of Aries. So we've got quite a lineup of planets there, all in Aries. But they're minor planets, because I always think the distant
Hmm.
outer planets are usually more significant.
They're more.
There's also a trine with the moon in Sagittarius, an exact trine. So the moon is exactly in my thing. Yeah, you've got it at 13 degrees because it's slightly different time of day, but
Hmm.
it's still a trine. So
Yeah.
what does it all mean? This is the question.
Well,
But
I think between January and now, based on the because Mars would have been opposing Pluto, maybe a redrawing of boundaries. It could be physical boundaries between America and other nations, or what's established as nations. I'm thinking about a lot of the chaos in the Middle East. If hopefully, fingers crossed, there is a ceasefire, but then it might come at a cost to some governments or people in terms of territory lost and gained. I mean, there's already talk about. I mean, it's very mixed with Ukraine at the moment in terms of Russia having seized land and they're not going to give it up. Zelensky said Ukraine's not in a position to claw those territories back, but at the
no,
same time, he
well,
doesn't
I'm
want to
glad
give
he
up
said
either.
it because, I mean,
Yeah.
that's the sensible conclusion, isn't it? Really,
Mm,
whether it's
yeah.
right or whether it's wrong is neither here nor there. I mean, there's going to have to be some kind of compromise, otherwise that he's already lost so many men. I mean, there's hardly any men
Mm,
left in Ukraine, young or old, and the land is completely decimated. I mean, there comes a point where you have to compromise. Um, so,
yeah.
yeah, you could be right on the boundary issue, but what also interests me is the Saturn and Neptune, because they're both in Pisces and they've moved closer together. So that means the
Yeah.
whole confusion and lack of confidence in our own ability to sort things out, that's all come back. And it may be temporary, but it's very much there in March 2025. So I wonder if we come from January where we start to understand things a bit more and we've got a bit more information, hopefully, and Trump has
Mm,
made it all out for us. Let's be idealistic and think that that will happen. And then by
yeah.
March, everybody's confused again. And everybody's thinking,
Yeah.
well, I don't know what to think now. um, and it might possibly be because boundaries are put in place, and some people have been very idealistic about that, and they haven't wanted to face the fact that there's going to have to be compromises made, and they're going to be
Yeah.
disappointed and confused by it. Possibly it's that. Um,
Well, I was listening to an Indian astrologer, and in Indian astrology, the North Node also represents new frontiers. It's crossing established boundaries. But in the sign of Pisces, which is a sign of what's another word for diminishing, where you have total collapse of any kind of boundaries, unity with the universe, and all that kind of stuff. This one astrologer was going on about, oh God, how do I phrase it? Because he was speaking in Hindi. He was
Oh,
talking about,
I'm just doing a
he's,
translation. Yeah.
he, he was talking about aliens as well, about finding new ways of doing things. He totally went on to like a total global government, like a total collapse of existing systems and the creation of a new one. But I think, according to Indian astrology, the almanacs that they use, Saturn would have entered Aries by the 25th of March. I think, according to their calendar,
All right. So they're
but
slightly
or at
ahead
least they
of
would,
that.
at least because it's towards the end of the sign, they would probably just interpret that as being in Aries. Yeah. So that was interesting. So that's why I thought, well, political lines would probably be withdrawn. I mean, I think we're so kind of used to it now. Threat of war, like either in Taiwan or Ukraine or the Middle East, or the civil unrest in Africa and South America. So, and I think taking into consideration Putin's used a hypersonic missile, which is also nuclear capable. The only defense the G7 countries have left is if they have advanced weaponry that they haven't released to the public, which they have been probably reverse engineering from craft that was recovered from Roswell, which is an actual conversation they've had in court. Lockheed Martin are saying that they did try to reverse engineer something, but they were unsuccessful. But then it was
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
closed court
Because
setting where they were going to go into more detail about that. So
what you're
I'm
talking
skeptical.
about, yeah, you're talking about Roswell, which is the famous story about where they found a UFO and some bodies. Is that right?
That's correct.
Um,
Yeah.
and so I also was thinking today about the fact that, we had men on the moon, God knows how many years ago. Is it 50 years ago? Anyway, it's an awfully long time ago. And then nothing. And
Yeah.
suddenly Elon Musk springs up and says, all right, we need to go to Mars. And something must have been developed in those years. It can't have been just completely abandoned. Um,
Yeah. I
well,
agree.
it just makes you think that something, they have been investigating and finding out things. Maybe, this takes us back to the 25th of January and what's going on in the heavens at the moment, that we are going to know more. Um, and then
Yeah.
it's going to be ever present, and um, it's the beginning of the age of Aquarius, it's the beginning of Pluto and Aquarius, and life isn't going to be the same. The thing that gives me hope is the fact that Pluto and Mars are not in opposition so much. Because at the
I think
moment,
maybe we need it. I think maybe we do need some sort of a revolution for people to wake up. I think the reason we're still kind of suffering is too many people are still okay with the way things are. But I think all it takes is in your heart to kind of just stand up and say this isn't okay, and that's all that needs to happen for there to be kind of some sort of collective shift.
yeah, it does
But I
seem
think
as
it's
though there's more conversation about the inequalities of the world and the
yeah,
fact that I'm, I belong to a philosophy group. I don't go very often because sometimes it isn't philosophy, people are just chatting, really. And philosophy to me is about, well, how does that affect everybody? And what would a human being do in that situation? And what's the moral right thing to do? And what do people generally do when they're under pressure? What's the human thing to do? Because the human thing might not be the moral thing. And then what does moral mean? What is our morality? But basically, there are people on there talking about the fact that some countries have been kept under by Western countries, particularly the UK, and they're talking about slavery, really. And I get quite hot under the collar about that
Mm.
because I think, well, my family were actually servants. They were what was called in service, and they
Mm.
certainly weren't well off at all. They lived in poverty. My mother's family, particularly, my grandmother was in service, and I'm no different to a lot of people in England. I'm just an ordinary person.
Yeah.
That's what my family of origin is. So I get quite cross when people say, well, you've exploited us. It's like, no, somebody was exploiting you, but it wasn't personally my family, and it
No, I think
wasn't
it's
the
the political
majority of
class.
people. So we need to get out of this idea of this country exploited us. What
Mm.
we need to think about is the fact that the people that have been ruling us for centuries, thousands of years, have got to stop behaving the way they do.
Yeah,
And
I
because of the rise of the internet and the planet Uranus disrupting everything, and the poorest people and the most ignorant of people, the least educated people, all know what's going on now.
yeah.
And it's bound to cause chaos because not everybody has a rational mind and not everybody is able to stand back and think, oh, what does this mean? People have a knee jerk reaction, which is very Uranus, but it's all
Mm.
part of the process, isn't it? We're never going to be the same again now. We're not going to
No,
put up with being
we've come too
serfs.
far. And I think it's,
Slavery is not on. Yeah.
yeah. I was just going to add to that really to say, I think we need to experience the uncomfortable conversations and the discomfort to make sure it doesn't happen and again in our society. And I think it's already happening. The Pluto and Aquarius manifesting. You have the Artemis Accords, which were written. It's kind of this global agreement on how civilization needs to be with each other when they discover stuff out in outer space. It talks about the advent of technology to become spacefaring, and how we all need to cooperate with each other and prioritize not just human life but the diversity of life on this planet, which I think is very interesting. But also in the UK specifically, you have the shadow Sorry, losing my words there. The Shadow Great British Railway. I don't know how many people have heard about this. I follow the new civil engineer. They have an amazing range of articles and podcasts and things, and they're talking about nationalising the railway and having. But what hasn't worked in the past is with each railway having its own plan. There's a national plan which has already been drawn out, which makes the best use of resources. But it talks about renationalisation. There's already a plan in place; it just needs to happen. But right now in the media, what's coming up is companies resisting the renationalisation, where people would win. So it's like that's why I feel optimistic for the everyday average Joe, because I think we're the ones that seem powerless in the face of everything. If a selfish politician has made a decision risking all of our livelihoods, then it feels like we don't really have a choice in that. But I think the future, there's so much hope for the future. That's just Pluto in relation to Aquarius. Sorry, I keep zoning back into Pluto and Aquarius, but I think specifically with people waking up, that's another thing as well, which is going to. You can't forget that Uranus. You can't fully predict what Uranus is going to bring with it because everything about it
Yeah.
is unpredictable.
Well, it does bring disruption if
Hmm.
well, it's part of it. I started to think about the tarot actually and the Fool, which I think always links up with Uranus,
Hmm.
because there's an illustration of somebody just jumping off a cliff, really.
Yeah.
But sometimes in life we do have to jump when we're not quite sure where we're going. We don't literally jump off a cliff because we know what the absolute outcome of that would be. But on a
But
symbolic level, sometimes in life you need to trust your intuition and say, it just doesn't feel right. if I don't do this.
Hmm.
Um, Maybe there's a collective. It's also interesting that Uranus has been in Taurus for all this time, because
Yeah.
Taurus is one of the most stable signs of the zodiac in terms of keeping your feet on the ground. So, you know, maybe it
But
is because,
it will trine Pluto in a couple of years.
yes,
I know because I'm going to be 42 next year. So that's my half Uranus cycle over with. So my midlife crisis. I think I'm ahead of schedule personally, but there it is. It's
don't
uh,
speak too soon.
because I was yeah. I'll heed that. I'll heed your warning because I mean my
just just when you think you've got the hang of life,
yeah. Oh, there's always something else. Yeah,
we
is that
can
all
always.
Uranus?
Isn't that what
Yeah.
astrology is all about? It's this
Well, yeah,
frantic search for some kind of explanation as to why life can be so messy and difficult
yeah,
sometimes. But
yeah.
I'm just looking at the time and I'm thinking, right, we're on to 46 minutes. I guess people might get fed up with listening to us. But hopefully that's given a little bit of a
Yeah.
flavour of what we think is coming up for next year in
But do you
terms
think,
of
just a
change.
quick astrological question, sorry to cut you off,
Mm.
Sheila, but I feel that the state of disclosure as it is, I think a lot of people are pushing for disclosure, not just with Epstein lists and UFOs, but also technology, how it could help people, health technology. So do you think I'm thinking of the tarot card, the Fool. Do you think the disclosure could be accidental in the end? Like,
Well, that's an interesting thought that I hadn't had before. Well, yeah, why not? Except that we've got Uranus in Taurus, so maybe not
but that,
yet.
wouldn't that be like a huge resistance and then a huge pushback, in terms of physics, and for equal action, there's an opposite reaction, that kind of thing.
Possibly, possibly. I mean, if we think about how Uranus has manifested itself over the last few years, I don't think we've given ourselves time to think about that. Perhaps we can do another little
Yeah.
recording on that. Perhaps we could really spend some time looking back over the events of the last few years and
So, but I'm
really think
sensing you
about
feel
that.
like I'm sensing you feel that nothing's going to come out of. There's no cat out of the bag until Uranus hits Gemini. Then is that what you're thinking?
Yes, because then I think, oh, well, Gemini,
Right.
isn't it all about immediate thoughts that come out of your mouth?
Yeah.
With no processing going on. Sorry,
Yeah.
anybody that's Gemini, but maybe there's a certain element of
Mm.
that, that it's more likely then. I'll have to start looking in the ephemeris and working out when Uranus goes into Gemini. But maybe we need a gradual realization about these great mysteries and these fringy aspects of life that a lot of people don't want to think about. I mean, a lot of people like to keep their lives mundane and they
Mm.
take the safe route, especially if they've got Saturn very strong in their chart. And it's the Uranus people who shake things up and say, we're going to throw a party tonight, blow it. Been
Yeah.
studying for a year, blow it. I'm not
Mm.
going to continue on the straight and narrow. But I think in the main, human beings are always seeking certainty, aren't they? It's a
Yeah.
big thing that people talk about in therapy, actually. When I was a therapist, we talked about certainty and uncertainty, and what does it feel like when too many things are uncertain. It's a very nasty feeling for a human being, and yet the aspect of uncertainty does exist in human existence. It
Yeah.
cannot be ignored or swept under the carpet. There is a need for certainty and a need for structure, as in Saturn, but there's also a need for just throwing stuff out and starting
Yeah.
again and having a new idea and saying, well, we're not quite sure, but we've done a few tests and we think this could work. That's the wonderful part of the
Yeah.
human psyche that is so exciting. The difficulty is when one or the other take over. So we have too much Saturn, and so everybody toes the line and behaves like a robot, and nobody really has a thought of their own. And then the other one is when everybody thinks they can be free to do what they like, say what they like, and we get chaos. So
Yeah.
somewhere in the middle lies the answer. And it's making me think
Yeah.
that we could do another whole podcast on Uranus, because it is
I
so
think we should.
important to think about this.
Yeah.
And when we think it might get, I think that's such an interesting thought that you've had about when somebody lets the cat out of the bag.
Mm.
But I'm not convinced at the moment that I think it's quite yet. But
I think it's evident in the population because, if you think with new technology comes new kind of problems like stem cell research, we still as a population haven't decided if we're okay with that. So I think you're right. The fabric of reality is has a lot more to do with chaos. I think it's a human need to have order and structure and stability so we can prosper. But I think we need chaos for fresh inspiration, fresh ideas. Um,
I mean, a
I
lot of
think.
people, when they arrive in the therapist's office,
Hmm,
their first complaint is that why is everybody else's life sorted out and my life is such a mess? Because they
hmm,
don't actually realise how messy life is. They've
yeah,
got this
absolutely.
fantasy that if only they could get the hang, or if only they were luckier, then they wouldn't have
Yeah,
any disruption at all. And I think it's one of the reasons why a lot of people, when you try to talk to them about what's going on in the world, they'll say, "Oh, anyway, so what are you doing at the weekend?" Because
yeah,
they can't manage it. They,
that is
they
so
just want
true.
they
Yeah.
just want to be happy and jolly, and then you get
You want to
people, and
escape.
it's all over the internet, isn't it? It's people saying, "Oh well, all I want is to be happy," as if it was
Hmm,
nothing, as if it wasn't a big ask. That's
yeah.
all I want. I just want to be happy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm,
Um,
so, I'm honestly so sick of influencers in Bali kind of advising the rest of us how to be happy, but the reality is they're living paycheck to paycheck. They can only afford to live in Bali, where they can live like royalty, but also they're not talking to their own family, and they're probably on all these antidepressants as well. Like, it's. But everyone just sees the video and, the nice images of someone doing a advanced yoga posture near a waterfall. So
yeah,
people fall for all that kind of stuff. So yeah,
it's only
yeah,
because we're jealous and we want to be in Bali ourselves. But
well, yeah,
these are important topics to think about, and it's been inspiring, hasn't it? Because we've suddenly thought, as we're talking about it, oh, I know what we need to think about. There's so
yeah,
much more that we can talk about these enormous changes that are taking place, and really, the internet and phones are in their infancy. This is just the beginning. When we look back as to when we all got our first computer, and
yeah,
then we got excited because we could actually talk to our granny who was 2,000 miles away, or
yeah, yeah.
and
God,
it's
yeah, I still
got
remember
beyond
it.
that now. We take it for granted, and yet there's been a backlash, there's been a messy consequence because the technology has moved so fast that we've lost our breath. We're not thinking about it anymore. And you only have to
Hmm.
drive a couple of miles up the road, and you've got people on their phones, completely glued to their phone. They're not even looking at the traffic. You've got
Yeah,
to be really careful when you're driving nowadays.
hmm.
And these are all the negative effects of Uranus, really. Sudden,
Yeah.
unexpected technological advance, and how the poor human brain can't keep up with it. But it doesn't mean to say that it's all bad. It just needs thinking about, really.
Yeah.
So maybe that's what our
Absolutely.
job is, to help ourselves and
Yeah.
other people think about what the hell is going on here. So, yeah, and then maybe we can think also a bit more about the details of 25th of January, if anything else comes to us.
Mm.
It certainly looks like an interesting year ahead.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I would agree. It's and I just get an overall intuitive feeling that it's the change that we've been waiting for, and I think people are finally ready for something new. So
Yeah.
yeah, fingers crossed.
Yeah, so